Zels, December, our busiest month. People seem to think it's a cricket season. For us, rugby just goes into overdrive. The internationals are over. It's the Investec Champions Cup, EPCR Challenge Cup. Then we go into the Vodacom URC, and then we go into a New Year's Eve. And then we're back into the Investec Champions Cup, the EPRC Challenge Cup, and then we're back into the Vodacom URC. So...
you said New Year's Eve. As far as rugby is concerned, 2025 kicks off this weekend.
And then we've got the Varsity Cup. Let's not forget about that, okay?
Who could?
And then the Curry Cup gets played somewhere, and there's all those under-21s. So for a South African, rugger is now January the 1st, basically till December the 31st.
Correct.
And I think that's the one big difference between the Northern Hemisphere sides and our guys. We really don't have an off-season. All our coaches don't have off-seasons. And that's been the biggest transition that we've faced in the last 3 years, which also has proved as challenging as can you balance playing in the URC, in the Champions Cup or Challenge Cup, and get a Curry Cup squad in at the moment. It's a different mindset for the South African coaches.
Yeah, totally different. I mean, for fans, absolutely fabulous. There's never a weekend that you don't have rugby on the telly. I think for coaches and for players, it's a completely different ball game where you could basically schedule your conditioning around a season that starts, peaks, and then tapers off. Now you're basically on call 12 months of the year if you're an international test player. So very, very, very new ground for South African rugby. I'm not sure how sustainable it is to keep going on this 12-month schedule. But like I say, fabulous for the product in terms of if you're a broadcaster, you're loving it.
Before we get on to all the glories of the Champions Cup and the Challenge Cup that we're going to have over the next fortnight, and obviously the big derbies in the Vodacom URC that are going to come in, let's finally just wrap up this international season. We had the one game, Ireland against Australia. We both backed Ireland to win. I thought they'd win a bit more comfortably. The autumn series, as they've called it, they brought out 4 nominees as player of the series. Cheslin Colby was one of them. Thomas Ramos was one of them. Josh van der Fleer was one of them. And who's the fourth one?
Wallace Atiti.
Wallace Atiti, the New Zealand breakthrough player. Now, your guys, SA Rugby Magazine ran a poll. Obviously, Cheslin, 95%, give it to him. Now, we were big about that. Cheslin, for the last couple of years, should have been right up there as World Player of the Year. But when I look in the context of the 3 internationals and then Ireland played 4 and Australia played 4, Cheslin didn't play against Scotland. Played against England, was very good. And played against Wales and kind of couldn't quite get into the game because the ball went Curtly Orance's way.
Yes.
So I look at those nominations and I think, when I think of the box especially, on that 3-match show, I think of Ox and Chair.
Yes.
I think of the box scrum.
Yes.
Why is a prop not in that nomination?
Mate, they're just not sexy enough. That's just the bottom line. All of these guys, Wallace Atiti, great ball carrier. The Irish love Josh van der Fleer. Obviously, Cheslin, massive poster boy for the diminutive players and fans of it's for all shapes and sizes. So I think a lot of these awards and the PR around it, we just need to accept that it is actually about marketing more than about being a credible award. Not that Cheslin or any of those guys don't deserve to be recognised, but I just think they're probably better players. You mentioned the scrum. For me, South Africa's entire resurgence under Rassie Erasmus, the success of the Stormers, all of that built on Stephen Kitsoff and Frans Malherbe, and then later Oxenchair, and the depth of talent we have here, Vincent Koch, Wilco Lowe, etc., etc., etc. So the fatties are the foundation of successful rugby. And I think that applies in every competition that's professional.
Look, I've always had an issue with this one player of the year, especially in a team sport, because your 10's only as good as your pack.
Spot on.
Your pack can be hopeless and your 10 gets you out of it at times. So who gets the award? There should, for me, be a back and a forward.
Totally.
What's the best forward and what's the best back?
Agreed.
So if you look at the autumn series and you look at all the teams that played, and I'm including Georgia here, I'm including Italy, Fiji, all those teams, Spain, Portugal. Who's the forward that stood up for you the most? And who's the back that stood up for you the most?
Oh, mate! Put me on the spot a bit. Look, I mean, you've got me thinking about the box scrum. For me, the guy that sort of advanced his case the most in this November tour was Thomas du Toit. I thought he was outstanding when the opportunities presented themselves. He took it and ran with it. Before the tour, I said, what are we really going to get out of playing Thomas du Toit? He's a guy that, in the past has definitely looked the part, but maybe hasn't delivered. But I thought he was great in this November tour. Really sort of his stock rose for me, and I thought he was fabulous. In the back line, it's probably a lot trickier. I think the arrival of Joe Suali'i to Test rugby certainly got the heart racing a bit, especially in Australia. There's definitely an athleticism about this guy. The way he can basically fly, it creates a bit of a tactical wrinkle that I'm sure the Wallabies are going to exploit going forward. So those are the two guys that sort of spring to mind. But again, they didn't play an excessive amount of rugby during that November series. So it's more sort of flashes, moments, than it is consistent performance.
So you still haven't given me your back.
Well, Joe. I would go with Joe.
So you go with Joe,
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, I was watching the highlights again of the Australia-Ireland game, and the commentator, I don't know who it is, but says in all his life he's never seen anyone as good in the air as Joe Soili in rugby union. So I can only imagine the guy's never seen Victor Matfield to start with.
Yeah.
And he's never seen a guy called Izzy Folau,
Yo.
who wasn't too shabby in the air either.
Yeah.
Great rugby league player, had a marking exercise with the AFL for a year, didn't quite make it. But as you say, Australia needed an injection or something. Joseph Soili has given them that.
Yeah.
They were hell of a competitive. We thought it would be a grand sham, not a grand slam. They started off with that shock win against England, 42-37, and the way they got it was also just incredible in the last minute, playing some fantastic rugby, put 50 points past Wales, changed a lot of their team, I think, to set up to try and get the best out of that Ireland result.
Yeah.
Lost 27-30, and I still believe that Scotland's the best of the teams at the moment in the Northern Hemisphere outside of France. I'm talking about the home unions.
Yeah.
And then had it. They had control of that game against Ireland for so many minutes and could actually come away with a win. Ireland, 23-13 defeat against the All Blacks, 22-19 win against Argentina, and 22-19 against an Australian side that won 1 out of 6 in the Rugby Championship, got clobbered by South Africa twice, hammered by New Zealand in New Zealand, took 67 points against Argentina in Argentina. So,
do you see that as Australia being much better or just Ireland on the decline?
I certainly see Ireland kind of, when I say on the decline, not on the decline that they're going to drop down to 8th, but I do see Ireland in the next 2 years dropping back into that pack between 3 and 5.
Agreed.
I think it's going to be a case of South Africa, New Zealand, France as those top 3 teams, and then an Ireland, Scotland, and England, Australia playing around with those other 4 till 7 places.
I like that.
I do think New Zealand's going to get better. They're going to come through.
Yep.
Again, more by default than design.
Yep.
I think he's stumbled upon his pack.
Agreed.
They know that Bowden Barrett is the answer at 10. Mackenzie comes off the bench. They've got to fix their midfield. I still don't think they've got the right midfield. But they're getting the right core of loose forwards, again, through injury. So Wallace Satidi would never have got a game. He played Fiji, and Blackadder got injured against us at Johannesburg, and that's when the guy came in. He's never left, and he won't leave. He's like a young Michael Jones.
Yep.
So I think Australia, obviously, a bit of momentum, certainly played a nice style of rugby. But again, it goes back to just how dominant that Bok pack was against them, how strong the Pumas and the All Black pack was against them. And you ask, was there a pack that was that strong against them up north? Probably not.
Yeah.
So, yes, they've improved, but there's certainly been a regression or a flattening of that Irish squad. And that golden generation has gone, led by Sexton. A lot of those players who were youngsters, they are now old, and the new ones who have come in are not quite where those guys were. So I think Ireland they bank it when they were 1 in the world, according to the official world rankings. I don't think they're going to be 1 in the world for some time.
No, I agree with that. I think Caelan Doris is a serviceable player, a decent player, a good player. I'm not sure he's a World Player of the Year candidate, and they seem to rank him as their best forward. And so I think that right there is sort of highlights, showcases where they need to improve. They've got some aging guys. You mentioned Tyke Furlong, probably closer to the twilight of his career. James Lowe can't play forever. Jamison Gibson Park. There's a bunch of guys. They need answers at 10. There's Prendergrass coming through. But yeah, you're kind of waiting for answers in those situations. So lots of moving parts there for Ireland.
So to wrap up the international season, Box started as 1 in the world. They finished at 1 in the world. I think that's where they should be.
Did you name your best forward and back? You asked me.
My best forward it goes without saying, oxen chair. Goes without saying, oxen chair, and you'll see lots of pictures of him in his red Christmas jumper. It still hasn't arrived for us. It's coming. We'll be doing the next show.
Yes, I can't wait.
In the URC competition. That salads don't
Win scrums.
when you scrum. Salads don't win you matches. Salads though bring down your cholesterol.
Mate, you are looking a bit lean today.
I must tell you a story about that before I get to my best back. So. Yes. You saw me chatting to you on Tuesday, and I felt a little bit hot in your company. It wasn't because of your good looks.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, it's like I was looking at those big biceps of yours, and you weren't getting hot, and made it home by 1 o'clock. Had a meeting with Dobber that I had to cancel, and just basically spewed. And
what?
Had a viral gastro, and can I tell you one thing? Every time I jugged an Energade, a Lucozade, or a Coke or a water, I knew what was coming. 2019 World Cup final, but I was England's pack. I just knew I was going to get poleaxed. I had such dehydration, but within 15 or 20 minutes of actually downing this liter of fluid,
it's coming straight back up.
I knew that the scrum was called, and oxen chair was going to put my arse and whatever else back into another country. It was the most horrendous 5 hours, 6 hours. I thought I was on death row, and I'm here today, feeling a lot stronger. But geez, I now know why Joe Marler was never the same after 2019.
Wait.
Okay? I now know what it feels like to scrum against the Bok pack. It's called viral gastro.
Oh. Moral of the story: stay away from Taco Bell.
Exactly. But apparently it's in the air. So it's in the air. Rugby's in the air. So yeah. So I've had a horrendous 2 days, but I am back. You want to know who my back of the tournament was? And to me, Damien Dialandi.
I knew you were going to go there. Good choice.
I just thought that game against England was... He just stood up and announced himself again as the best 12 in the world. He was very productive for the 65 minutes on against Wales. And just a player throughout the last 10 years, who's been very good. But when I think about, like you said, when you went Joe Swahili, it's just there's an excitement, there's a buzz. You know he's on the field. Now, you know Damien Dialandi's on the field. You also know Oxen Chair's on the field. So, South African, biased, partisan, but they are the best in the world. They are number one in the world. They have the best backs.
By a long way.
So I'm going with Dukes, and I'm going with Oxen Chair.
Great call.
Those are my 2 autumn players of the year, back and forward.
Beautiful.
They don't make the World Rugby's Player of the Year, and that means it's a good thing.
Exactly, you're doing the right thing there.
Okay, so we've wrapped the international season. We can all rest during Christmas knowing the Boks are won. World champions, unbeaten at the end of the year tour, and rugby championship winners. What a great Christmas gift. Thanks, Rassie. We hope your shoulder's getting better and you're recovering well.
Yeah.
And hopefully in the next couple of weeks we can have a dop. Maybe before the 2027 World Cup in Australia.
Stranger things have happened.
Looking at this weekend, Zali.
Yes, sir.
Investec Champions Cup. We got 5 South African teams involved, 2 in the Challenge Cup, 3 in the Champions Cup. And when I look at the 3 teams that the South Africans are starting off with, they're all 3 historically Champions Cup winners and have been some of the top teams in what has always been Europe's big elite tournament. So while the Premiership and the URC, which was the old Pro Rugby, and the top 14, those were your primary leagues in every country. The big one there was that was their World Cup. It's a league stage, and then you go into playoffs. And teams wanted to win, which was then called the European Cup, called the Champions Cup. Now the Investec Cup. It is the one to win, and it's no longer European competition. You now have South African players there officially playing in South African teams. So you've really got a World Cup going there because you have number 1 in the world.
I mean, with the exclusion of maybe the Blues and the Crusaders, you've got all of the best clubs in the world in one competition.
Completely. And at the moment, you wouldn't even say the Crusaders. They're historically one of the best. And the Blues, every 18 years, they pitch up and they have a team, okay? So, you've got Toulon, you've got Saracens, and you've got Exeter who are playing our big 3. So it's the Sharks against Exeter in Durban.
Yep.
You've got Saracens against Jake White's Bulls.
Yep,
And
London.
That's in London. And you've got Toulon up against Dobbo's Stormers. They can't play at the Cape Town Stadium or DHL Stadium this weekend because of the Cape Town Sevens.
Correct.
So they've taken this to the Nelson Mandela Bay Stadium where they played before.
Great venue.
They should get a good crowd. There's always great support for the Stormers there. But Toulon, 3-time champions. experienced their most incredible 3 years when they won it 3 times in a row. And I always say they were the first South African team to win the Investec Champions Cup because they had 7 South Africans in that squad, led by the mayor of Toulon for about 5 years, Big Joe van Niekerk. Then Jean Smith joined, Donnie Rousseau joined, Brian Habana joined, the incomparable Bakkies Botha was there, the Butcher. You know, there's a great story about Bakkies when he was always the original enforcer at South Africa at the Bulls. And he told me that when he went to Toulon, he wanted to make sure that to let them know he wasn't going on a pension payout. He was going there to commit to them and play rugby. And in all that time, he only ever played 1 test for the Boks. That was against France in Paris, and we actually won the game by a point. And he came into the mix to help Hanneke with a Jan Pieter Stef de Tooy, Jan Eben Etzebeth and that. And he became an iconic figure at the Stade Mayol. And he said that the only way to show people his presence was he had to make the opposition bleed early on. So they gave him the nickname the Butcher.
Yo.
And that wasn't just because of the brewery he was making.
I was going to say.
But he became the Butcher because when you played at the Stade Mayol and Bakkies Botha was there,
you're going to bleed.
You bled very early in the game.
I like that.
And the only time I ever saw Bakkies bleed was he had an altercation with Census Johnson, the 195 kilogram Samoan prop, who I think was playing for Toulouse. And it was at the bottom of a ruck, so you don't know who did what.
Yeah.
But they both got up, both got sent off, both were bleeding and both were laughing. So Toulon have an incredibly rich history. Many would say that they were mercenaries. They put together a World 15. Because you had Carl Heyman there, you had Ali Williams there, Drew Mitchell there, Matt Gittow there.
The best of the best.
Yeah, it was the best of the best.
Like that Japanese goal kicker.
Yeah, that was the best of the best. But to win it 3 times in a row, they also won a top 14 that 1 year out of those 3. But the South African contingent was so strong, especially a Donnie Rousseau, a Jean Smith, a Bakkies Botha. Joe was on the tail end of his career at that time. He was club captain. They alternated between him and Johnny Wilkinson. He didn't play in the last final, but he played in the 2 previous to that. And then a Craig Byrne and a Janne Vermaak. They were also there. And they have gold to show for it. So I think for people who don't quite know the history of these clubs, and we don't see them that much, Toulon revitalized and a massive club side that was built over the last 10 to 15 years by another one of those billionaires, and they've managed to sustain their place in France's top 14. But them up against the Stormers, it should be a cracker. The poor Stormers, I mean, every time they get Sasha back on the field, something happens. I mean, the most skilled 10 probably in world rugby, the most exciting 10, gets on, does wonders for the Stormers, gets injured. Gets on for the Boks, does wonders, knee goes. Put him back into rehab, gets on, gets knocked out. And the referees deem that there's nothing untoward about that. Out again for 12 days. I think I spoke to Dobbo and he said he can't even remember taking the drop goal from 50 odd meters, okay? So
that was me.
That was me. So yeah, so again, it's just not happening for the Stormers in terms of injuries.
Yeah.
You get that one season where everyone goes down, and you get that season where no one goes down.
Yeah.
But they've. I looked at the non-available list, and it looks like a Springbok select
Lineup.
15.
Basically,
yeah.
the 2019 World Cup squad.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So, a lot to do for them, and I think people need to take cognizance of the fact that this is a squad, and we're not making excuses for the Stormers. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, when you take 8 players who are always starting in your 15 and they're not playing, and they have some of them have long-term injuries, you're not going to be the same side. As exciting as we say it is that they're going away from home, it's also not ideal. You play one game in Stellenbosch, you play one game at the DHL Stadium, you play one game at the Nelson Mandela Bay Stadium, and then you're back in Cape Town. So they're doing it hard this year. But then they say that Bo Karakter.
I think our point about the scrum and the value of it and the need for physicality and power and how that's central to success is going to be proven by the Stormers this season, because they're going to get Brannis back. They're going to get Malherbe back. Roos is eventually going to come back to play for the Stormers. There are reinforcements on the way. Murat's on his way. Stacey Toley's on his way. So I think the Stormers will be a very different team when they're rolling downhill. This is a team built on capitalizing on the momentum generated by that set piece. And when you take that away from it and they're playing off the back foot and taking some high risk taking decisions, then they become vulnerable. So I think once that pack gets rolling again, these guys are gonna be good.
If you look at home games are everything in these competitions, and in the past, the European teams had a 2-hour flight, was probably the longest that they had to go. The dynamic has certainly changed in the Investec Champions Cup now and the EPCR Challenge Cup, that South African teams fly there and their teams fly here. So it's really a new competition.
Very much so.
It's a far more international competition. And I know there were a lot of people in the beginning that were anti-South Africa's inclusion and said, well, it's taken away the best of Europe. But we've evolved that now. It's now a global club competition. Like you say, the only thing missing probably is the best Crusaders and a Blues, the winners of Super Rugby Pacifica.
Yeah.
Other than that, you've actually got the best teams playing in this league.
Yeah.
When you take it from top 14, URC, and obviously the Premiership. So, and then the quality of the sides. And what I love about this competition is is you don't get the same teams every year in the league.
Yeah.
So you get to see
The
different
variety
players.
of it.
You get to see a lot of different internationals coming here, be it English internationals, French internationals. It is, for me, one of the most exciting competitions. The only drawback in a competition like this, because of the global season, is we have 2 weeks, and then we break for 2 weeks of Vodacom URC. Then we go back for 2 weeks, and then we break again, and then we have to wait till May for the last 16 playoffs.
Yeah.
And that's the only way they could structure it. So as a team, we could fly through the league stages, say your Stormers, and be top of the table, but come May, we got 9 injured players, and we go out in the last 16 because we're just not the same team anymore. So it's a very, very complicated season structure to negotiate, be it
Absolutely.
URC, be it Champions Cup, or be it the Challenge
I mean,
Cup.
if these competitions didn't run concurrently, you could plan for each of them for a start and then a playoff finish. But when you have both of those seasons running at the same time and potentially being knocked out of one or both or advancing in both, and you get to the knockout stage right at the end at the same time, that must be a hell of a thing for coaches to plan around, because when you factor injuries into that, it's a whole different ballgame.
I remember Leo Cullen saying in the first season that the Stormers won URC, and he was complimentary of the Stormers, saying, "Well done, great victory by the Bulls, going to Dublin and beating Leinster in the semi-final." But he spoke about the complication preparing a squad for 2 playoff matches. A semi-final one weekend in the URC, a final the next weekend in the Champions Cup. And look, they've got an international squad, and they've built that over a decade. But his thing was the challenge for South African coaches, and he said that would take time. And it was more a caution to the media in South Africa, a caution to the public in South Africa to say, be patient and understand what these guys are going to go through. Because one, we've got to build a squad that's got 30 really good players that you can bank certain matches at home with your second, and I'd call him, but your reserve depth, your second tier player, and then take your first team on the road to win a big game, because your reserve player is good enough to win at home. And that's what Leinster can do, and Toulouse can do. Very few other teams can do that in this competition. They don't have that depth. So you'll find teams that will use their extended squad. So they're not deliberately sending an understrength or a weakened side. They've got to pick, how do I get 3 out of 5 wins? How do I get 3 out of 4 wins?
Totally.
It doesn't help sending a full-strength side if there's no guarantee that you're going to get the win, and they've got to play at home the next weekend as well, and then travel back 12 hours on the plane. I think one of the few things we saw was La Rochelle, who'd won it twice in a row. They sent their full-strength side for the league and for the playoff against the Stormers in Cape Town, and I think that's because they were coming to Cape Town. Because why else would they? I mean, I think those guys saw a week in Cape Town.
They wouldn't have missed that trip.
A week in Cape Town.
Totally.
That's kind of a city you don't mind handing out.
Yeah.
If that had been in Pretoria, you may have found that a very different,
Ronan O'Gara has to have
a very different La
have a game.
Rochelle that arrived in South Africa. So, but it's one you'd like to think the Stormers will win, regardless.
Look, they're the home team. And I mean, we talk about the travel factor. What the European clubs have an advantage is that the South African teams, in this competition, you don't play anybody from your league. So if you're in a pool with another URC team, you won't play them. So everybody you play will be top 14 or English Premiership. And for the South African teams, that means every away game is a 12-hour flight. And the European teams, they have the advantage of an away game in France, if you're a Scottish team, or an away game in Wales. It's not really the same thing. You're not comparing apples with apples there. So the Toulon team has had to fly a long way to get here. They are captained by a former Cape Town boy, or David Ribbons. And they've got some quality players in there. I'm not sure. I'm always going to back the home team at this stage of the Champions Cup, because I feel like just having the advantage of not having to have spent 12 hours on a plane, knowing the conditions, definitely gives you an advantage.
I just want to come in with that 12 hours because...
Sure, right.
Just
exactly.
to explain to people as well
Exactly.
that South Africa only becomes a full member of the EPCR next season.
Yeah.
And that means their travel costs, they benefit on every sphere. To get into these competitions,
Yeah.
the South African Rugby Union had to basically pay their way in. And they also had to do a deal with an airline, which was a value in kind deal, which meant that they fly via Doha and have a big stopover. So a 12-hour flight to London becomes a 27-hour journey for our guys.
Yeah.
And that's what they've had to go through for the last 3 seasons. It's not an excuse, it's a reality. It was the only way to get into we had to basically buy our way in and earn the right to stay there.
Correct.
And the players have done that through performance. The Stormers won the URC in the first season, hosted in the second season. The Bulls hosted in the third season. The Sharks won the Challenge Cup in their first go. So we belong there as players. It was a big risk that SA Rugby had to take financially. Things will get better from a travel point of view, from an economics point of view next season. But they come here in a 12-hour flight. We go there 27 hours flight.
Yeah.
So that's why teams like the Bulls, for example, playing against Connacht last weekend, actually being up there favors them for
Big
their
time.
match against the Saracens.
Big time.
They didn't have to do this big travel. And that's why I think they'll go well against Saracens. Because they're the Bulls. They're your favorite team. You love Jake. They're playing well. And they started to play with not an arrogance, but an attitude of like beating Connacht, being 28-0 up against Connacht in their URC game last weekend. They just look like that South African side that you feel should go there and dominate. Where in the first 2 seasons of the URC, you were thinking, how's the South African side not dominating up there? And I think they'll win fairly well against Saracens.
Well, mate, 3 syllables, Wilco Low. I don't know how you stop that guy at scrum time. And if you Saracens, it doesn't matter what your plans are, that guy's going to wreck it at scrum time, and that changes the face of the game.
And good to see, Kane and Moody looking good again. Creel playing well. Gumede, hate to say it, but it looked ugly on the telly.
It was unfortunate.
Yeah. It's not the way he went in, it's the way he stayed there with his fingers in those eyes.
Apparently the guy had some sleep in his eyes. He was just trying to get it out.
And there was aggravation, but there's no such aggravation for anything near the eyes.
No.
So they talk about an accidental head clash. To me, nothing is worse than eye gouging in the game. And it's not like a little tiggle. I felt every time I looked at it, I was like, my goodness. I think that's the end of your year.
Yeah.
And I think he was quite fortunate to get the ban he got and have it reduced by 50%. But the Bulls looking good in the URC, one of the form teams. They will have to be one of the favorites for South Africa.
Absolutely.
When you look at the South African challenge in the Champions Cup, for me, it has to come from the Bulls.
Absolutely.
I think they've got the quality in depth of squad.
Yep.
At the moment, if there's one squad that can balance both competitions, or give us hope that they can balance it, for me, it would be the Bulls. I don't think the Sharks have got the depth just for both. The Stormers, 7-8 big injuries, no. The Lions don't have the depth to do both. And the Cheetahs, this is their tournament in the EPCR Challenge Cup that they want to do well in because they just don't play.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that 100%. I think when you look at the Bulls' home ground factor, the altitude factor, the way that this team is coming together, they have been building for some time. They do have that momentum. The scrum issue that I mentioned, Keo Zels and Wilco Low, 2 massive powerhouses at the set piece. And I feel like the Bulls are definitely worth that bet. I think the Sharks do have a lot of talent, but there are question marks around the quality of their play. At 10, there may be a little bit of a lack of consistency there. And they've got to make decisions at 9 between Jaden and Grant. They've got an abundance of talent there, but it's about getting the best out of it. And if you look at that game against the Stormers did not perform well in that game and almost won it. And if you're the Sharks at home with that Bok contingent, almost losing a game to the Stormers in that performance, I would be quite nervous about that. So the Sharks need to kind of, I think, pull it together a little bit. For the Bulls, the one issue that needs to be addressed is that fourth quarter fade that has become something of a consistency for them. If they can start to finish games strong, they'll be a real force in Europe, I think.
But what do you attribute that fourth quarter
fade?
I mean, we've seen them at home like be 36-10 up and win it 42-36, thinking that altitude will kill the other team, and then it seemed to have killed them. And last season we spoke about it. Are they playing themselves out of the game after an hour just to get that big lead? But going abroad, there's no issue of altitude. Is it a conditioning thing? Is it a scoreboard factor thing?
Well, I'd be surprised to hear that it's a conditioning thing. I wonder how much of their plan is built on a strong start. And I think South African teams historically, that's how we've generally played, is come out and just mashed people in the first 20 minutes and hope that we do enough damage there to kind of get us home with a little bit of petrol in the tank. And I think maybe the Bulls need a plan for the fourth quarter, a specific plan that on the 60-minute mark, this is what we kick into if we're in an X-point lead. I don't know if it's a lack of planning. I don't think it's a conditioning thing. It may be just the quality of the guys that come off the bench, and the contribution that they make. Maybe Jake will play around with what he's got on that bench and look at kind of beefing them up, even if it means a slightly slower start.
If you look at Saracens, not quite the same team without Owen Farrell.
No.
England, not the same team without Owen Farrell.
No.
He's always been one of my favorite players, Owen Farrell. A lot of people don't like him because of the way he plays, but he's always reminded me a bit of a Richie McCaw in the backs. If he played for you, you'd love him. If he played against you, you couldn't stand him because he doesn't go away. He's a tough bugger.
Great rugby player.
Yeah, any guy who plays a professional game with his dad
must be pretty good.
So Andy Farrell was 32 and Owen Farrell was 16 when they played their first games together, which tells you that, by the way, Owen was born at quite a young age for Andy.
Don't do the maths on that one, boys.
16 years and going strong. So if you're playing as a 16-year-old at 12 or at 10 in that level of play, you've got something, and it's in the genes as well. I mean, for those who are not familiar with Andy Farrell, he's not just a great coach for Ireland and now the British and Irish Lions coach. He was one of the greatest ever rugby league players. And unfortunately for him, when he came over to Union, he was right at the tail end of his career. Mm-hmm. So what we saw was basically a bloke who came to Union for a romance story and a pension payout.
Yeah.
You didn't see
the best of him.
The Farrell who dominated rugby league for the best part of 15 years. So the Farrell family, massive. Owen Farrell, just such an integral part of Saracens, not there, and you just don't replace a player like that.
No.
And you look at Saracens' form in the last 2 seasons, they're there and thereabouts, but they're not the Saracens who won 3 Champions Cup titles. They're not the Saracens who had Schalk Brits at hooker for 250 games, who had Neil de Kock at 9. These are South Africans, by the way, for 250 games. Who had Skalkberg at the tail end of his career there, who had Smitty there for a couple of seasons, Matt Stevens there, Maritz Buerter there, a host of other players. Brad Barrett, I mean, geez.
Yeah.
He has legendary status in that club. Played SAA, played SA under 20, left the Sharks as a 21-year-old, went to Saracens, was magnificent, played many, many a game for England, played for the British and Irish Lions. So Saracens, at one stage, they used to call them Saffacens.
Yeah, Mikey Rhodes. That's
there were so many.
Yeah.
Michael Orrick was there as well. Had so many. I think Michael Orrick went there. Was he London Irish?
I think he was London Irish.
He could have been there, okay. But so the Saffacens, they used to call them at one stage. Ed Griffiths, who used to be the CEO of SA Rugby, he was the CEO there as well. Johan Rupert's investment in Saracens. It was, if Toulon was the
Damien Willemse.
Yeah. He went there. I think he played 1 game.
Correct.
Right? He went there for a fortnight.
Yeah.
So Saracens has always been a very popular club in South Africa because so many South Africans have been playing for them.
Yeah.
Just like Toulon was in the French top 14 and in the Champions Cup because of the South African contingent.
That's where the name actually comes from. When you've had 6 beers and you try to say South Africans, it sounds like Saracens.
Saracens. So it's the Bulls against Saracens.
Yeah.
We're giving it to the Bulls.
I'm giving it to the Bulls, absolutely. 100%.
So we got 2 South African wins so far to start the Champions Cup. We've got the Stormers to beat Toulon. We've got the Bulls
To win at Saracens.
So, if you, in the old days when we were in sporting isolation, okay, then newspapers used to run a thing like, say your best time in the 100 was 9:99. And then the Olympic winning time, the previous time was 10. But because the Olympics, you run 3 heats, it's all tactical in that. Your best time could have been a 9:92.
Yeah.
Then we would run it and we would say, Zalem Nel would have won the Olympic gold with 9:99, okay? So if we look at, so if we take that rationale, we would have had 6 Champions Cups already, okay, by beating Toulon and beating Saracens, okay?
Yeah.
So the third one is against another champion, Exeter Chiefs.
Correct.
Who came from nowhere, then had this incredible run in the Premiership and transferred that form to Europe, became the talk of British or English rugby.
Yeah.
They were in Durban against a Sharks team that say they're on a winning streak, but they haven't been in good form in the Premiership.
No, they've lost 7 in a row. I think the only wins have been in the Premiership Cup, which is like the rugby equivalent of the FA Cup. And they've lost...
Or the Vodacom Cup.
Or the Vodacom Cup, yeah. They've lost a lot of players in recent years, Stuart Hogg among them. And I think they're playing...
Where did they lose him to? Jail.
He was following somebody. But
for those of you who don't know, Stuart Hogg, great player for Scotland.
Yeah.
Managed to play for the Lions here. Not the guy who just nibbled on Willie Leroux's arm and said there was no intent. But he has... He's not been too good with his misses, and he was charged for stalking and numerous other things, and I think he was locked up, and then he wasn't. He's in France, I think, trying to play some rugby.
Yeah.
Unlike Rocky, Elsom was on the run from everyone. Australian captain who was in charge of a French
Bloody
club.
Australians.
Apparently financial irregularities. They want him back as well. So just giving you context to these aren't in-house jokes. If you've been following the rugby landscape, you'll know what's going on with Stewie Hogg and with Rocky Elsom. But yeah, Exeter...
they've got some great players. Henry Slade's there. I think he's been playing a bit of flower for them. That Manny Faye-Wabosu's there. Jacques Vermeulen, the former Western Province. I think he played a Stormers game or 2. He's in the mix there. But like I said...
But their coaching personnel changes. What did you make of that?
Yeah, they've made some changes there. The defence coach, South African guy, Omar Munimi, is no longer around. So he's moved on.
Baxter?
Baxter's still in the mix. Obviously, the head coach there, director of rugby. I'm not sure what they call him. So,
but you're a good mate of Omar's.
Yeah.
And what does he say about Exeter?
Oh, he says, look, great club. Obviously lost a few players in recent years. You know, there's been a turnover of personnel from when he first got there. If you look back in time, I think wasn't Don Armand one of the guys that was kind of central to Exeter's emergence. So I think it's a bit of a cycle. You know, there's been a movement there, and now they're almost in a rebuild stage. So I expect Exeter to bounce back. What makes them tricky and dangerous this weekend is obviously they've lost 7 in a row. It's almost nothing to lose. You want to kind of turn this thing around, and the Champions Cup comes with no history this season because it's round 1. So it's an opportunity to lay down a marker and be like, hey, things haven't gone well in the Premiership, but in the Champions Cup we're contenders. So you've got to think they would have targeted this game as an opportunity to make a big statement.
And like the Sharks did last year when they started seeing it go awry in the URC, they were like, we're never going to make the top 8. Our only way into the Champions Cup is going to be through winning the Challenge Cup. And they put all their efforts into that. They got a really good league draw, but then had to go away and beat Clermont, I think at the Stoop. Sia kicked that great goal-kicking performance that afternoon. I'm not talking about Sia Khaleesi, by the way. The other Sia was leading Google at the time, the fly-off. So teams then do decide that's the one I'm targeting. Because I'm going nowhere in the other competition. So and because there's no relegation in the Premiership,
right?
You can come last and just let's go again for the next season.
Yep.
So do you think there's enough in this Exeter side to knock over the Sharks?
No.
I think the Sharks are going to pump
The
them.
Sharks are going to win, and quite comfortably, I would say.
And I think the Sharks are going to pump them, and that's another champion that a South African team would have downed.
Can that mean they're going to give us the trophy on Sunday, or how does
Dit
it
is nou
work?
7 goue medaljes vir die Suid-Afrikaanse spanne.
Brilliant.
In the Challenge Cup, the EPCR Challenge Cup, we've got the Lions playing.
Ospreys?
And the Lions are playing in the Challenge Cup. For those, again, who don't quite know, you had to be in the top 8 of the URC to qualify for the Champions Cup. If anything below that, you go into the Challenge Cup.
Correct.
Now, also, if you don't make it through the league stages in the Champions Cup, you also drop down into the Challenge Cup. So there is another opportunity for those, if a South African team doesn't quite go through and do as well and make the playoffs in the Champions Cup. A lot of rugby being played there, but also a lot of opportunity. The Lions, for me, underachievers in the Challenge Cup, because it's a tournament that I always thought they would do well in. It suits their style of play, doesn't quite have that structure and intensity of the Champions Cup, but they'll get one big win, and then the next week
Yeah. I think, look, Challenge Cup is definitely
they disappoint.
the second tier of the European Cups, obviously. It's the guys that didn't qualify for the Champions Cup. And as much as the Lions fall in that category and we rate them highly, I think if you're a South African team, primarily, historically, you've based success on where your pecking order is at the end of the season amongst the other South African teams. So in Super Rugby towards the end there, it wasn't about winning Super Rugby, it was about making sure you win the SA Conference. And so I think the URC has a similar connotation for South African coaches in that they want to make sure that the pecking order is high amongst South African teams in the URC. And that's probably where the Lions' focus has been. And of the 4 South African URC teams, we'd say the Lions are the ones in recent times who've had the least depth. They've kind of built that up through emerging talent. They've unearthed some great players that have come through. But yeah, it's going to be interesting this weekend because they've sent a bunch of guys home for the round 2 match against Pau at Ellis Park. So they're going to be fielding guys who are not their first choice players in some positions against Ospreys. The last time they played Ospreys, I think, was in March in the URC in Swansea, and they took a 36-21 reverse there. So lots of ground to make up. They put themselves in a position which is quite challenging, almost to create insurance for this Power game at home. I'm quite keen to see how they go there.
Again, does that not talk to our point that rather bank 5 at home
Totally.
than it could be 4 away from home? And all you really have to do is get to a position where you qualify for the next round.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the educations when we speak to a South African audience, and we were kind of like, we were raised on Currie Cup, strength versus strength, and we were raised on Super Rugby, initially strength versus strength. You play 1 to 12 in Super Rugby. Your big thing is to finish between 1 and 4. 1 and 2 get the home semi-finals. From that, top place team gets the final and you win.
Yes.
It's a 3-month competition and you move on. This is so different to what we play. And this is so strategic as well. This is you sometimes drop a game to win the tournament.
Totally.
And
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You've
and
got
for
to
us
be
to understand
strategic.
that as well, if you look at the top 14, historically, the team that finishes top of the top 14, that's France's primary division, they play 26 league games. On average, they win 16 or 17.
Yeah.
So most teams there lose 9 to 10 games who are winning their league in the season.
Yeah.
And it's an accepted thing.
Yeah.
No one's playing 26, winning 23. And there's also not this drama if a team drops a game. So like a couple of weeks ago, I looked at a result. I think it was La Rochelle, who got blanked in a league game. And it was just some of their players were out of form. Some of the internationals were away. And the next weekend, they went out and they kind of beat some team. And I was like, imagine one of our teams get blanked in a competition.
Yeah.
We'd be calling for their heads.
The lynch mob would be
Yeah,
out.
the jerseys would be burnt. It would be over. And it's because we've always played in quite an isolated system where it's always been about you have to win every game
Every
to get
week's
to
a
the
final.
top. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not that way. Certainly not that way in the competitions. Not when you're playing in 2 competitions. And as you say, the potential of a 3rd competition if you don't make it through to the playoff stages of the Champions Cup and you go into the Challenge Cup. And then also the consideration that there's a Currie Cup always looming in this country. And I believe people make too much of the Currie Cup. It is a feeder tournament. It's something that should be seen like that. But there's still so many media and supporters who want to give it the lure of the Currie Cup of old. And it's not the Currie Cup
the
of
same
old.
thing, no.
So it's kind of like you hope to get to a point where you can put some senior players in if you make the playoffs. but it has to be seen as an under-21/feeder tournament that prepares teams for the URC in our case, and then from there for the Champions Cup or the Challenge Cup. But if you look at the Lions, I've got them to lose.
I'm going to give it to the Lions, mate. I'm a huge Lions fan. I love everything about those guys at the moment. And I think Cash would have, as much as he is rolling the dice on this thing, I think the Lions have generated some nice depth there. I know they're missing Kate Voluta to a concussion as well, amongst the other Oaks that they've sent back. But if you Ospreys, you don't really know what you're going to be facing, then there's a chance the Lions catch them by surprise. I'm going to say Lions by 2.
Lions by 2. Okay, I've got the Ospreys to win by a comfortable 12. And I don't even know who the Ospreys are picking. I just know it's a game in Wales. It's in Swansea.
It's in Swansea.
Swansea. And as you say, Pau is the one that they're looking for. And that's not the Panda Bear, by the way. That's the French team. Okay? So, and that's when I'm back in the Lions, obviously, to win comfortably. We'll talk about that more next week.
Yeah.
And then the Cheetahs. Everyone's second favourite team if you don't live in Bloemfontein. And for many, their favourite team. They are like the Fiji of international rugby. Everyone loves them, but every 4 years they only get together.
Yeah.
So you got to feel for someone like Frans Steyn, director of rugby, one of the icons of South African rugby, schooled at the famous Grey College, not the infamous, the famous Grey College. Basically went and played his rugby at the Sharks, then went over and played in France. Was sensational in France for Racing, played for Montpellier, went to Japan, and then went back to Montpellier, and then came back to the Sharks, and then off to the Cheetahs to complete his career, which was a wonderful ending for him there, and then straight obviously into the pound seat with MJ Smith as the CEO, the players take over there. And France's saying they just need more rugby. They can't just rely on the Challenge Cup. But just the fact that they're in it is great, and I'm expecting big things of them.
Well, the thing with the Cheetahs that excites me is the potential for this fairy tale story of the Cheetahs winning the Challenge Cup to qualify for the Champions Cup. Like, that would just be an amazing story, I think, if the guys from Bloemfontein only get a little sniff in one competition and turn that into a Champions Cup license for at least one season and maybe knock over a few teams there next year. So, yeah, that's exciting for me. The Cheetahs definitely lacking in game time. France is saying, they'd love to be part of Super Rugby because they can't get into the URC at the moment. I'd love to see the Cheetahs play more often, and they should be a permanent fixture of the weekend lineup, if you ask me. I love those guys.
But what does complicate it for the Cheetahs is that they don't play in South Africa. They don't have home games.
No, they don't.
So their home games are split between...
Although, mate, if you were going to choose one place to be like Bloemfontein in the Northern Hemisphere...
Well, if you were going to choose one place to sound like there's a familiarity...
You can still speak Afrikaans.
With the language, it is Amsterdam.
Okay? Amsterdam.
So they'll be playing in Amsterdam, which I think is just amazing, okay?
Yeah.
They played in Amsterdam against Papillon. Apparently Marvin Orrie still plays for them.
Yeah, Marvin Orrie's in the mix there.
He's still in the mix there, okay? And Papillon, a rich history as well there. Percy Montgomery went there after the 2007 World Cup, played there. I spent a bit of time there when I was doing his book. Henry Tarligi was playing there. A lovely club. I mean, Dan Carter went there also. Just Achilles went after a few games. In the year, they actually won the top 14. And then they went through a shocking spell and they got relegated. Just fought their way back into top 14. But there's a South African player in the 1996 tour of France and the UK, Joe Gillingham, who used to play for the Lions, S-under-20, Springbok, bloody good centre, good-looking lad. He went over there, never came back.
Nothing ominous. He just had a great time.
He had a great time. Met a lovely lady, married her, has got many a kid, and he's got Safari Joe's in Papillon.
Beautiful.
And he's become quite the talk of the town over there, and he can do a spit for you. So everywhere you look in these French teams, these English teams, there's a South African connection, eh? And so we always claim a victory. It doesn't matter what, eh? We say it's got to be Joe Gillen's influence on Papillon. Must have been Marvin Orrie's line out calling.
You spoke about Henry old Pasolo Tuilagi, the junior. Well, I say junior, weighs 198 kilograms.
That's Henry's son.
There we go, mate.
Yeah.
He's
one of 11, I think.
Ironic that he's got Solo in his name.
Yeah. What's his name? Monty was used to tell me. I think I've told the story before, but I will tell it again. It's a great one. So when they got to training, they had a coach who believed that the best attacking play for the fullback was to run at the 8. A little short ball on the inside.
A mismatch.
And Monty said he took one look at this giant, okay, that He'd already experienced at the World Cup running through every Springbok forward.
Yeah.
And then at training, he would say, I'm only doing contact if I'm on Henry's side. I'm on Henry's side, otherwise I'm not playing contact. No. So he was a beast. There's a couple of YouTube videos out there if you've got time. Joe van Niekerk versus Henry Tuilagi. Joe van Niekerk was a great player, but I think his greatest achievement was rising every time Henry Tuilagi basically broke his back in a line-out. There was one particular line-out where Joe was catching the ball and basically descending, and Henry was ascending. And how Joe got up, I don't think anyone will know, but he did, and off he went again. So yeah, I mean, I used to follow top 14 Premiership before we came into these competitions, and had a big love for the Champions Cup, particularly, and then the Challenge Cup, when the first South African team to win that as well, Montpellier, when Jake took over. And at one stage, there were more Du Plessis in the Montpellier 23 than there were French players. There were 4 Du Plessis and 3 French players. And they would call them Montpellier, what do they call them? The box, Mont Box or something like
really?
that.
Okay.
Yeah, and obviously they weren't very happy with Jake, the French guys, because they said if the English players can get French lessons, why can't they get English lessons? Because all they speak at training now is English. So the one disgruntled player, when Jake did leave, having won their first ever European title for them, which became rather irrelevant, he said the only thing that happened in my year was that my rugby got worse and my English got better. So you had, in that year, I mean, when they did win it with Jake, and then they doubled it up the next time. You had Jan Goosen being player of the final. You had Andre Pollard, who came off the bench and kicked an important couple of points.
Seen that somewhere before.
Yeah, and that was, I think, one of the big disappointments for Montpellier. There was Andre Pollard had so many injuries. There was COVID and everything. I think he ended up playing 26 out of a possible 96 games for the last 4 years. Went to Leicester and played more in 15 months than he played there. So they've had them. They had Kobus Reinach, who's been there. Frans Steyn was there for a while. They had all the Du Plessis. Yanni, Bismarck, you name it, they were there. Jake was there. But they won the Challenge Cup for the first time ever in their history, and Jake White was the coach. So kudos to them for that. So I look at that Montpellier side, I look at the Saracens side, and I look at the Toulon side, and there's just South Africans everywhere. Okay. So I've always had a great love for this tournament. And then one of my favorite wins was 2005-06 season, Munster winning the final, and Trevor Halstead just being
the bus.
He was the bus at in the midfield for Munster. Sean Payne had also played for the Sharks at fullback. He was very good. It was a time when Christian Cullen came over, had so many injuries, eventually had to retire. Shoulder injuries, knee injuries. I don't think he was even making the squad at the end. He was so banged up. But Trevor Halstead probably played some of his best rugby ever for Munster, and it just suited his style of play. So you go back to those days to understand the South African influence in these competitions, and the love that I personally have for those competitions. And I think the more our public starts understanding these competitions, understanding the kind of the who's who, like we talk about the Crusaders and the Great Crusader side, and we talk about the Blues, that's original Blues side, the one that's now just won the, as Rico only says, the biggest cup in the world. But when you think of the Investec Champions Cup, think of Toulon 3, think of Saracens 3, Leinster 4 titles, chasing the 5th star. They've been chasing it since we've come into the competition. Hopefully they'll be chasing it again in the next season. La Rochelle, who won 2.
Toulouse.
Toulouse, who won 6. They are the team. They are the Crusaders of... If Leinster's the old Blues of Super Rugby, they are the Crusaders, and Toulon would be the Bulls.
Oh, I like that.
Or Saracens would be the Bulls.
Like
3 titles.
I like that.
So yeah, it's just fantastic, Rugger, and like we said, there's so much of it. There's 2 weekends of this now. Then we go into 2 massive weekends of the Vodacom URC with the derbies. 21st of December, it's the Lions in Cape Town against the Stormers. Then they've got another one just before Christmas.
Yep.
Then we go into the new year, and it's just Champions Cup again. And in between that, I know your favourite, eh? Because I think you've booked out for all 3 days to go to the DHL Stadium.
Well, for the Sevens.
You love Sevens,
Oh,
eh?
mate, I love it. Absolutely love it.
What is it that you love about Sevens?
Oh, mate, I just love I love the adverts in between the games, mate. Brilliant.
Huh?
Love it. No, Sevens is lots of fun. Look, some of the talent there, what I like about Sevens is the disparity between the best players and the worst players is huge. So you see a guy like Colin Isles who could barely catch, but just the raw speed of it back in the day. To watch him just roast Oaks on live TV was fantastic. Ciabello Sonata, another great example of that. And while we're on that subject, fantastic to hear that Ciabello may be back in the mix for the Stormers very shortly. What an amazing, amazing talent.
Well, the talk is that he may be in the mix for this weekend against Toulon. Just, for me, our greatest ever Sevens player. I wanted to make the shift to 15s. Was very good in 15s. Got into the extended Rassie Erasmus box squad.
Yep.
But I never felt was ever going to be a first choice player for the box 15s. But could have been
The best Sevens player ever.
that the world has ever seen
100%.
had he continued to play sevens.
Yeah.
And I think if he went back to sevens tomorrow, it'd still be iconic in terms of his performance. But had a very serious car accident 2 seasons ago. No one thought he would ever play again. He's worked incredibly hard. I know he's worked very closely with Dobbo as well, and Davy Snowman, Norman Lake at the Stormers in terms of the back coaches and the head coach. A lot of Rita's giving him a lot of kind of encouragement, and he's a very popular guy at the Stormers, and leads with an attitude. When I was at the African Games in Accra, Ghana, he went up there and helped with the women's Ghana team and the men's team. They got a famous win, the women's team. So he's kind of really put in the yards, and to see him back on a field will just be an incredible story, you know.
Yeah.
And we just hope that it goes well for him. If he does get a gap this weekend, if it's not going to be this weekend, it will definitely be next weekend. I know he's been training very, very hard. I've had a glimpse of him at training, flying down the touchline. But a popular player as well. And you get those players, you just want to succeed all the time.
Spot on.
And you just hope for the best for them. But if he was playing sevens this weekend, I would have made sure I had tickets to the DHL Stadium.
Yeah.
I unfortunately can't get that excited about sevens because I may be a bit of a rugby traditionalist, okay?
How
and
dare you.
I'm a little bit old for that vibe as well.
Yeah.
So I'll glance at it on the telly, but when I flicked onto the Dubai Sevens and I saw Spain clapping New Zealand, and
Twice.
Yeah, and then I saw Spain in the final, and I just thought, oh, you know, with the greatest respect to Spain, who is New Zealand and South Africa sending to these sevens tournaments that Spain is winning?
Yeah.
So
So anytime you see the guys go out in the green, you want them to succeed. As much as you try not to be attached to it, you see the Blitzboks run out there in front of the Cape Town crowd, and you want it to be a success. You're rooting for the guys, even though they may not be the best of the best in this country. Those guys, their conditioning program is something that'll mulch your brain. The work that they put into it, and they are representing the country, so you're always pulling for them to do well.
So can they do well? Will
Absolutely.
they win it?
Oh, I hope they will. I mean, last week was a bit of a letdown. I feel like it's high time that the Blitzboks got back to winning ways. I'm counting on them this weekend.
Could not be that because there's never expectation for them in Cape Town because they tend to obviously have a good time in Cape Town.
Correct.
But with no expectation comes no pressure.
Yeah.
And the potential of a victory.
I think there's definitely an opportunity for a bounce back.
So
if Spain can beat New Zealand, mate, South Africa can win the Cape Town Sevens.
So we're going Bokke by 10.
Mate, I've got South African teams the whole way around and Bokke by 10 at the Cape
So
Town
you've got
Sevens.
every South African team.
I got Cheetahs to beat Perpignan, mate.
So we got
Straight
five
out of the freezer
in
into a win.
Amsterdam. Okay, so you got five.
Just something to note: it is quite hard to scrum in clogs. So I don't know. I don't know if they're going to get that right.
And my daughter Jules is actually living in
There you
Amsterdam,
go, mate.
and she's at university there, and she works in a South African establishment there that only employs South Africans, which is very nice. So I'll see if she's actually going to go up to that game and make sure that she goes and supports the Cheetahs.
Yes.
Against Papillon.
Yes.
And so you got 5 South African wins, 2 in the Challenge Cup, 3 in the Champions Cup. You got
Plus the Blitzboks.
You got the Blitzboks to win.
Yes.
What other South African victories do you have this weekend?
I don't know, mate. If there's darts, we're winning it.
I don't know about that with Luke Littler. But I do know if you go to eBets, you check out our affiliate program, And you can go to our WhatsApp channel. Thanks for supporting it. We were climbing into the late 30,000s. We'll probably get to 50,000 after this weekend when we have 5 South African wins. There's some cool content on there. Some nice behind-the-scenes stuff. Some nice little snippets that Zels puts up there. Tells you how he's feeling all day. His daughter Mac, best softball fielder, under 10. Incredible achievement last night. He was at the award ceremony. A very proud dad. I mean, this young lady, swimmer, dancer. The only thing he hasn't done with her is put her in a rugby team yet, and I'm hoping he doesn't just yet.
She actually wants to play rugby.
She wants to play rugby. Got a great offload. She can pass from both hands, which most players can't do at the moment. She's 10, okay? So congrats to Mac and to Taryn, obviously, for that award. Zels was very smiling this morning and last night. He's got all the wins, so go there. There's always plenty of prizes. If you hook up to our WhatsApp channel, we've still got some Salu City hampers to give away to you. We'll be getting other prizes for the rest of December. Nice Christmas prizes. It is our busiest month of the year.
Yep.
Because every month is busy. Rugby is now 12 months of the year. So you'll be hearing from us every week. Some weeks we're a bit more excited than others. But for this weekend, we haven't had a game yet in the Investec Champions Cup. We haven't had a game in the EPCR Challenge Cup.
Unbeaten.
And we are unbeaten going into this round. And when we chat next weekend, it's going to be Faith from Faith, Bokke by 10.